Let's sit back, grab a flow chart if you can. I want to talk to you, Mark, about China's infiltration of the Labor Party and how it's worked. I think the easiest thing to say to people here is that they've worked out that the softest part of the system are people who just want to be seen to getting along and getting along with people who will give you an awful lot of donations.
Well, you know, the Mosselman defence is to say that he's never been a frontbencher and he's never been exposed to state secrets, and it's true to say that he's kind of a poor, hopeless bugger at the bottom of the food chain in terms of power in New South Wales Parliament House, but it's also valid to point out that he's been a protege of Bob Carr, a former Premier and Foreign Minister, and it takes that defence of saying, you know, I'm sort of so hopeless and ordinary here that my involvement with the Chinese has got to be totally innocent. It takes my mind back to the first MP I ever saw duchess and the recipient of largesse from the Chinese, and that was the Eric Fitzgibbon, who was a wonderful, wonderful fellow. Everyone loved Eric. He was everyone's uncle and a wonderful guy. But he too was at the bottom of the federal parliamentary food chain back in the 90s, the Hawke and Keating government. He's the father of Joel Fitzgibbon, who went on to be the Defence Minister. And there was a Mrs Liu, who subsequently was identified as an interesting Chinese character who showered the Fitzgibbons with largesse, and there were trips and donations, and on it went. And you might have said at the time, and I would have thought, looking at this, well, Eric is not going to do any harm and whatever's going on there must be reasonably benign. But you think of what happened, that the word went out to Sussex Street Machine, the Labor Party in New South Wales. Eric's getting all these donations and support from the Chinese. You know, you had a bunch of greedy general secretaries, starting there with Roosendaal through to Dastiari. Yep. Both ended up associated with Wong Jong-mo and his money, who wanted the money themselves. So picking a guy who was lowly and vulnerable in the system worked, because the Sussex Street Machine said, we'll have a share of that money. And it then evolved over the course of 20 years to the point in 2016 where Sam Dastiari, and I think one of the most disgraceful incidents ever in Australian politics, traded away Labor foreign policy on the South China Sea in return for donations from Wong Jong-mo. That's what happened. And if these laws applied now, Dastiari probably would be charged with treason. So picking someone lowly in the system is not necessarily innocent if it gives you a chance to network up and around into the Labor Party, get hold of them, because they want the money. The Chinese, of course, are flush with money. That's not a problem for the Chinese. And if at the end of it you buy a political party's foreign policy, that is a definition of foreign political interference that should be seriously illegal in this country. So, you know, I think that's the context in which Mosselman should be seen. Being innocent and lowly and hopeless is not a defence, because the Chinese seem... I think, you know, as someone who thought the Australian-Chinese relationship in the 90s was reasonably normal and beneficial to both countries, I'm horrified and believe that the Chinese have been totally insane in going down this path of political interference. It was never going to work for them. It was never sustainable. It's backfired disastrously. It's poisoned the relationship now, and Mosselman is the latest manifestation of that.
Yeah, I mean, also at the staffer level is such an important thing too, because there's this staffer that I think is currently working for Daniel Andrews, aren't they, Rita, who even in the press of the recent days is somebody who has gone off and done CCP-inspired courses while in the employ of the Premier, isn't she?
Well, for the Labor Party, yes. I just don't think you could ever argue that someone who's got that level of access, whether they're a staffer for an MP or minister or premier, or has been elected to government, is lowly and that can't be compromised. I think that level of access is hugely disturbing to many Australians, that by a few donations and however else they are cajoled, that they could influence an elected representative. I think it's a huge worry, and I think it's something that we've been apathetic about up until the last couple of years, when we've finally woken up to the fact that these methods are going to be used. I think for many of us, we just thought the Chinese wouldn't try that on, that it's too bold to actually be trying to get staffers and even compromise elected representatives. But that's precisely what they've tried to do. And I don't know. I mean, Mark would know this better. We know of a few notable cases, but is that just scratching the surface? Are there others who are compromised? Is there other money that we don't know about? And is it actually having an impact on policy?
Well, it did. Sam Dastyari selling foreign policy is a clear example of that. Labor would be well advised to purge this influence completely from its ranks. Are there others who've been compromised? Possibly. We've got the ICAC inquiry into Ernest Wong, who was in the New South Wales Upper House. The Aldi bag's full of money. We'll find out the ICAC conclusions later this year. And, you know, Dastyari himself, in a bizarre twist, has called for a Royal Commission into this, which is essentially a Royal Commission into himself.
He'll be the council assistant.
He'll spend a lot of time in the witness box himself if we have a Royal Commission. Maybe there is a need for some judicial process to get to the bottom of it, but the best thing to do is for political parties to clean house, to purge these influences, wake up to themselves, to put some principles here and self-interest, political survival ahead of the money side of it, and for the Chinese to pull their heads in. If those two things happen, we won't have ongoing problems.
Yeah, I mean, what about the stuff though with? And I should point out, by the way, that when I was talking about the Andrew staffer, I was quoting from an article in the Oz where she didn't do the course while working for Andrews. Instead, it was 2013. She participated in a propaganda training course organised by the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office of China's State Council. And there was a backbench MP who did exactly the same thing back in 2007. So just in case those are...
I don't think it was called a propaganda course. She did it, but... That's the description now.
I doubt when you hold up the certificate, that's exactly what's what's there.
You'd be surprised. There's a few of the official Chinese roles where they actually they're propaganda information officers, or the titles are as dodgy as you'd expect.